Eighth grade is one of the hardest years for a lot of people. You know, those 13, 14, those are like rough years.
Hello, my name is Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. So, I'm just going to come right out and say it, okay? School kind of sucked. Am I right? And it's bad enough when you have that gnawing suspicion that maybe you don't fit in. But the real kicker is when other kids start to notice this too. And they think that the most appropriate response, the best thing for them to do, is to go out of their way to make your life misery. But you know, for me, like I was never ever popular. I just never happened to me. And so I learned to kind of just keep my head down and survive the experience. But for this week's guest, Wil Fisher, who is the host of the podcast Queerly Bel, he went from being one of the most popular kids to being a total social pariah overnight. And I can't even begin to fathom how you can get your head around that. And what's worse, being unpopular all the time or having a taste of it? But anyway, he reflected in this episode that in a weird way, being an outcast gave him this opportunity to evaluate things that he may not have otherwise done. And that time alone, away from being, you know, the belle of the ball, let him figure some things out about himself. And it was at the San Diego queer cafe Euphoria that he got to, you know, practice some of the things that he learned about himself. In this episode, we talk all about running into your teacher in a queer space, listening to Gregorian chants on your first date. I mean, I can't think of anything more romantic, can you? And coming out to your dad with the help of Dolly Parton. Let's just go deep in, like right from the beginning. Let's just like dive in. When did the queer lightning bolt strike you?
So, two strikes come up for me. The first is a strike when I was in first grade and I was in the back seat of the car and we were driving. It was like a carpool to school. And I think we were on the way home. And I was sitting next to the two boys that I would carpool with. And I don't remember what sparked it. My guess is maybe one of the two boys was playing with themselves or there was something that got sexualized. And in that moment, I had this excitement that was some of that queer lightning strike, but I didn't know what it was. I was a prepubescent, but I can still recall having this feeling of desire and certainly not knowing what it was. The second strike that I can recall came in the 8th grade. And what happened was I was a really popular kid. Not to brag, but I was really popular. Like in elementary school, all my siblings are older than me. They were really popular. And so I think that helped me sort of
trickle-down effect.
It is a trickle-down effect matched with the fact that I'm pretty charismatic and very nice, you know, and so I was able to make a lot of friends and, you know, I was friends with the most popular kids. So in 7th grade, I was like on the top of the popularity totem pole. And I was in junior high. And then in 8th grade, I stayed home from school one day. I rarely stayed home from school. But I stayed home because I wasn't feeling well. And I came back to school the next day and it was like the Twilight Zone. Like the place was like totally different. Like people weren't looking at me, people were avoiding me, people would be talking about me as I walked by and laughing. And I was like, what the actual fuck is going on here?
Wow.
What happened the day that I was gone was these two girls told everyone that I don't know if they said the words that Wil Fisher is gay. They said that Wil Fisher wears women's lingerie and Wil Fisher puts gerbils up his butt. And so this is what everyone was talking about. And so suddenly going from, walking through the school like I owned it, I was walking through the school as the fool, the outcast. And I remember like sitting down at lunch with my best friends who were the popular kids and them one by one getting up and changing to a new seat.
How long did it take you to find out about these rumors?
Oh, good question. I don't remember. I think, okay, what's coming to me is, so that was lunch. I remember lunch was hugely traumatic. And then it was the next class after lunch was biology. And there were these kids who I'd say were on the bottom of the popularity totem pole. They were often made fun of and they were kind of the losers. They were like sort of disruptive kids. And they were openly teasing me, making fun of me, bullying me. And that's when I heard the specificities of the rumors.
And you just never recovered?
Oh, no. I mean, I've recovered since. I mean,
No. I mean, sorry.
oh, like in
Not from the trauma, but in terms of people's perception of you.
Oh, yeah, good question. Well, so just to take it back again to the lightning strike, what happened now that people were calling me gay, before I really understood what that word meant, right? This is like before Will and Grace, before Queer Eye. It was like, I don't know what gay is, really. I didn't really understand the concept. But now that they were saying that about me, it provoked my internal inquiry. And so then I started like, oh, am I gay? And then I remember starting to recognize that I was like really hot for this one kid in my PE class. And
What's
I
his name?
remember, oh God, I don't remember. I remember he was Mexican though. He was a Latino boy and just like really sexy. And I remember we were like changing, right? And like I don't know, he was really kind to me despite these rumors. And we were changing and he was wearing boxers and his dick fell out. And that was it for me. Like that's what I was thinking about for the next like few weeks,
It was like lightning striking twice in one spot.
That
right?
was the real strike. Yeah, that was the strike. Was seeing this boy's dick fall out of his boxer
And
shorts.
you don't even remember his name. Lack of respect.
I wish I did so I could look him up and see if he's still hot.
Thank him.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of fascinating to me as someone who was an outcast from the get-go and never had the two perspectives. What did you learn from that?
There's something around uncertainty that was one of the lessons. Because I feel like I thought I'd be popular my whole life and that I had this untouchable status, And so I think there was a harsh reality of the uncertainty of life that came crashing down on me. I think also empathy. It's likely that these kids that ended up making fun of me in bio, like I would have not been the one making fun of them, but I would have laughed when other people made fun of them. And so not really understanding what that experience was to be an outcast, to be a victim of bullying. And then the inner resilience, that came as a result of it, and the journey within that came. So not only was I looking at like, oh, what do I desire? But I was like, who am I? And I think that is one of the gifts that us queer people have, is that we are in some ways forced into an introspective process at an early age that straight people sometimes never have to do or choose to do.
Until after their second divorce.
Yeah, exactly. And in their 50s, when they realize that their life is empty and meaningless and unhappy and unfulfilled.
But we get to have that feeling from like 13.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have to ask ourselves, like, who am I? Like, what is this? You know?
Every day.
But I do think there's a gift there. And I think that as queerness becomes more accepted and more commonplace, that opportunity or that imposed opportunity does get lost.
Do you
and I
think
wonder
so?
how that will impact. I mean, maybe that's hyperbolic to say that it's completely lost, because I'm sure even today kids have some journey of self-discovery, but it doesn't, I don't know. I do think that we do lose some of the resilience that comes from that. And I don't know, there is something powerful about, is this really who I am? And am I ready to claim it in the face of all the homophobia and bullshit? There's something really powerful about that.
I'd certainly agree that some of the sharper edges are dulled on that. But we're still seeped in a heteronormative culture where stepping outside of that is difficult and isolating. So, I mean, maybe it's easier to then go and find resources and find human beings that can affirm you than it was for you and for me in our experiences. But there is still some reconciliation that needs to be done before doing that.
I think that's a more accurate assessment. And yeah, I like the edges piece. And you know, because it's what I feel like now is I'm like, well, back in the old days, you had to, you know, like this, it was really fucking hard to come out. Now you kids, you just change your status on Facebook and you're done.
Yeah, it's hard in different ways.
Yeah.
God, why am I sounding sympathetic? Fuck them. It's easy. This has kind of sparked something in me, though, because I've been thinking recently, like, I mean, you know, I've been talking about queer spaces for years now. Bloody hell, I need to maybe find a new topic. But lots of people talk about how the needs of the queer community are now being met by online spaces. And so they are no longer frequenting queer spaces and they're having to close because they're no longer profitable. But I actually think, and I want to get your views on this, please feel free to disagree with me, that the queer bar is queer people's opportunity to live out their high school days. Because if you think about like the typical straight person, stereotypical, you know, I know I'm speaking very generally when I say this, there's this how do you say it? Romanticization? Yeah, that word. Of their high school days, because like those were the glory days, those were the days when everything was carefree, those were the days when everything was fun. But that doesn't happen often for queer people. Again, fully generalizing. And so they get to live that experience out in testing themselves in relationships and figuring shit out when they're in queer bars. Anyway, that's my theory. I'm just going to put it out there.
That resonates with me. And I think in some ways it can be problematic in that, you know, within those spaces, there's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. And so it's because we didn't have that experience in our youth to experiment with how we might be in that kind of setting, in that kind of space, that we need to use the crutch of drugs and alcohol to experience it. And I have nothing against drugs and alcohol. You know, I find them quite enjoyable sometimes, but
in moderation,
it is yes, exactly. But it's been a pandemic. It's been a major issue for the queer community.
Yes, yeah.
And so what I think about is, yes, I love queer bars, and I wonder and get curious about other queer spaces that can also give that opportunity.
Yes, yeah.
You know, and so part of my background is that I ran a queer retreat center, and part of what that was doing was that, right? Giving men, you know, LGBTQ men, an opportunity to come and be with each other in these playful and, you know, socially dynamic ways. So we have like a talent show, you know, it's just like something you might do in high school. We have a dance,
What's
you know,
your talent?
well, I do drag, but I also sing with a shruti box. It's like this little harmonium, and I sing
Oh,
these like,
okay.
yeah.
Like sea shanties.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a sea. I'd like to get a sea shanty in my repertoire, but yeah, it is very like old timey kind of vibe, you know, like kind of otherworldly music that I like to connect with. Yeah.
Nice. So we were talking about that lightning moment of like, oof, yep. I think maybe they were right about me, even if they were a bit horrible about the way they went about it. What were the next steps for you?
Well, so yeah, you asked me if I recovered, and it was a process. I didn't have anyone to sit with at lunch, so I was sitting in the library and kind of hiding. And I didn't have anyone to hang out with after school. And I would just like watch cartoons, watch TV or whatever. And like my parents suddenly were like, well, he's like doesn't do anything or see his friends, and it's like, and they would kind of ask me about it, but I wasn't out to myself or to them, so I couldn't really share with them. So it's like it's painful remembering that I had no one to talk to about this. Like it was like all just bottled up. Like, oh, I lost all my friends, and I am not even able to share that with anyone, because there was so much shame around it and the reason why. So eighth grade came and went, and then ninth grade, I became friends with this girl who was like kind of alternative and interesting, and we'd go to these like coffee shops, and we'd like listen to The Cure, and we were like, kind of goth, and like we'd like drink cappuccinos, and we would like, be kind of, I don't know, cool little 13-year-olds. I guess we were like 14 or 15, but like, so now I had a friend, and so that changed things. And then I ended up running for president because I realized that like, even though I had become a scapegoat and it was in many ways low on this social status, people still liked me. And so I won my election. I ended up winning like Leader of the Year award. And like, yeah, it's an interesting, like I in some ways only had like one or two friends, but people still liked me and respected me
Oh, that's
somehow.
interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to phrase this in a really bad way, so apologies. Okay. Your self-esteem hadn't been totally battered.
That's such a good question, because as I tell the story, I would assume so. But I had already been on the leadership council for the other 2 years, so it felt natural. And I suppose my self-esteem, let's say it was like at a 10, it was brought down to a 6, but it was still not a 3 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'd love a 6.
Yeah. 8th grade is one of the hardest years for a lot of people. Those 13, 14, those are like rough years.
But they don't need to be. That's the thing. And then, so what did exploration of your queerness look like?
Yeah, so, it started by looking like me fantasizing about the guy from the locker room. And it continued with me, let's see, I mean, I didn't have the internet. This was back in the 90s. I guess the internet existed, but I didn't have it. And I fortunately was doing theater at the time. And I landed a role in Joseph is an Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is a Bible-based musical.
Yeah, about pretty bloody gay. Come on.
Very gay. It's about all these brothers. And so it's a large cast of men who were older than me. I was one of the younger brothers.
In rainbow attire.
In rainbow attire, yeah, like being jealous of this fabulous drag, Joseph's coat. Yeah, super gay. And I got to be in this play, and I met my first gay person. So there was a couple gay people.
So who was it? Was it Joseph or?
And it was not Joseph. It was the brother who also played the baker. Joseph was so hot, though. He might have been gay. He was so hot. I hope he was gay. Um,
I just want to like have a quick side note here. You're holding a lot of
mm.
flames for a lot of people from the past.
Isn't that true for everyone?
Oh, I don't know. I'm like, you're not in my life. You suck.
No, I embrace my desire, even if it's unmet. I like to think about these guys. I mean, I have another one too, but I don't feel at liberty to share because he's somewhat famous now.
Oh, you can't say
Um,
that.
okay,
Can't bring that up and not
okay.
tell
Let's
me.
see. How can I share it without exposing who it is? Well, I'll just share that it was a flame that I felt very connected to, and he later became a contestant on The Bachelor. And so now
Oh.
I can go back and definitely see like how he turned out. It's a
Oh.
fun little connection. So, anyways, back to the baker. So his name was Rabba or Rob, but he went by Rabba, and he was just this witty, fun. Everybody loved him, flaming. Just a character. Super talented. He was a hairdresser by day, a fabulous performer by night, and he took me under his wing. And I think he had a crush on me. I know he had a crush on me.
But
As
wait, hang
did
on. What
the
was the age
yeah.
difference? Just so we can like put that out. Was it like inappropriate?
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. I was
Okay.
16 and he was he was in his 20s. I mean, I can tell you more than one story about inappropriate relations as a 16-year-old.
Well, we've all been there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happened more frequently in my generation. And part of it was because I didn't know any other 16-year-old gay men. It wasn't like I knew other gay men my age. And so Raba, when he invited me to come hang out. I don't even know how it happened, but he invited me after we'd been in the show together. He invited me to come stay at this house that he was house sitting at, and it was like this fabulous gay house in Hillcrest in the neighborhood. And I remember us listening to Gregorian chants, which is like this really cool thing at the time, and then and drinking like I'm pretty sure we drank like a wine coolers. Yeah, we drank like a wine cooler, and then he gave me a blowjob under the covers.
Under the covers.
Yeah, I think it was under the covers.
Wouldn't
Yeah,
you want to watch?
I feel like I maybe it wasn't. I don't remember. What I do remember is the next morning he is on his phone and he was so clearly telling the person on the other line that he had like betted me. But like without saying it, but like laughing and like all these little innuendos and like clearly like he was on this mission to bed me and the person was calling to find out if it happened. And while I'm in the bed with him, he's gossiping about it, but like trying to make it so that I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God, great.
So that is how you practiced your queerness. How did you
Yes, I mean,
explore?
I
Like, how
skipped a
did,
few steps. I skipped a few steps
but like, how did it?
because
Like the built-in shame that we come with in most models up until about 2015, maybe, is quite dominant. How did you wrestle with that shame?
well, that is a long answer because I feel like I've wrestled with it. I mean, even just recently, I was doing an ayahuasca ceremony in Costa Rica and was purging, was releasing some of the trauma and the shame around the story I just shared with you around, being bullied in the eighth grade. And it was in the middle of this ceremony that I suddenly had this realization that I had never cried about that. And I'm a crier. Like I experience my emotions and I had
Are you an
never
ugly
shed a
crier?
tear. Oh yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
amazing.
I like sob. I like raw, like so like big tears. So I realized though in that moment that I'd never shed a tear about it. And I asked myself in that moment, could I do that now? And as soon as I started asking myself that question, it was as if I was like had to vomit, but it was like the tears, like it was like, oh, I'm about to ugly cry right now. It was like erupting out of me. And so I like left the common space because I knew it would potentially be disruptive because I am an ugly crier. And I fucking cried. I sobbed and cried and just like let it pour out of
For
me.
how long?
It's hard to know because of the influence of the medicine, but it was maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and I'm like on this fence with overlooking this river, and it's raining, and I'm just like, wailing. And
Oh, wow.
so that's part of my answer around dealing with shame, right? And dealing with this trauma is that it's been an ongoing process. I mean, that was only in March. So I feel like alchemizing my shame is something I'm going to probably always be doing. Yeah, but I'd say going back to the baker again, I think it was seeing that you can be gay and be happy, and seeing that you can be gay and live a fabulous life, and seeing that you can be gay and have self-worth and self-respect. And so that was what opened my eyes to, okay, this thing that I've been hiding and that I've been so afraid of maybe isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. And that sort of, brings us to Euphoria if and when you're ready to go there.
Ooh, okay. I did have other questions, but let's go to Euphoria.
Well, no, you can ask me. I love your question. So if there's...
What was my question? Oh, yeah. So then my question was, in coming to terms with it, in being like, yep, I'm signing up fully, what was the coming out process like?
Oh, well, perfect. Yeah. So that brings us to Euphoria.
Oh, okay. Brilliant.
So,
2 lines. I think.
Yeah, exactly. So it was Raba and Derek who were these openly gay men in the cast. And funnily, they played the baker and the butler, who are these two characters who are in jail with Joseph. So the baker and the butler. And one of them, Derek, was tall and thin, and Raba was like more like short and fat. Well, not fat. He was just more plump. Anyways, so the two of them, like I said, kind of took me under their wing. I'm sure they could see that I was this gay boy who wasn't out. And so they invited me to this coffee shop called Euphoria, which was in Hillcrest. And so I accepted that invitation. And I remember Raba wasn't there, but Derek was there. And this fag hag, I know that's not PC to call it that, but she was
His gay adjacent friend.
His gay adjacent, yes, exactly. That's what we called it at the time, though, fag hag. And she was fabulous, and and embodied that role in such a perfect way. And I was sitting at the coffee shop, and we're having our cappuccinos. And
cappuccinos! So 90s. Sorry.
I know, so 90s. You're right, so 90s. And it's right next to a gay bar. Right. So it's like the underage people can feel like they're part of the scene because they go and they're by the gay bar, Riches, and they can, check out all the hot guys who come out to smoke or whatever. And then there's also a gay bookshop that was there. That's another lost space. And I remember going into the bookshop and seeing all these like gay magazines and just feeling like, wow, like this is a whole world. And I'm in Hillcrest, experiencing it through this lens for the first time. And so then I suppose that experience being at that coffee shop with all these gay men and seeing the club and seeing the bookshop, and also having spent time with Raba and Derek leading up to this point, I found the courage to come out. And we didn't do it in the coffee shop. We went across the street to their car. Well, okay. So anyways, I came out in this car, in this parked car.
Okay. So let me just understand the timeline here. So you weren't out, and Derek and Raba said, hey, we want to take you to this cafe. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, hey, what do you think about this cafe? And then you were like, oh, I'm gay.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah. I mean, they created the space, the safe space, and it was still scary and traumatic, and I can still put myself back in the back seat of that car, I said, like, I have something I want to tell you guys, and they were super loving and supportive, And it's funny, I just put this together that I actually came out to my mom in a car years later, and then years after that, I came out to my dad in a car. A lot of my coming out stories happened in a car, which is funny.
What does that say? You want a quick getaway?
Maybe. Well, the dad one's kind of a funny story, which I'll just tell you briefly because it's worth it, which is we were driving across country. He had picked me up at school and I had graduated and we were driving to New Orleans to see my cousin graduate and we're driving and he would like drink Budweisers while we were driving. And then when he got to a certain level of being buzzed, we would switch and I would drive so he could keep drinking his Budweisers. And I had decided that I would tell him that I was gay on this trip because I was like, well, college is paid for. Like, I might as well like spill the beans. And so we're driving and we look at the map and we're like, why don't we go stay in Dollywood tonight? And I was like, this is the moment. I've got to tell my dad I'm gay in Dollywood. And so I've decided to do it, but I'm so scared. And we're driving and we're like hitting all these exits, like exit 70, exit 69, exit 68. And I'm like mustering the courage and he's drinking his Budweiser and we're chatting. And I'm like, I'm going to tell him when we hit exit 60. And so now it's like 63, 60. And I'm like, I should really start the conversation and letting him know. And then it's like 62 and then it's 61. And then I'm like about to hit 60 and I'm like, Dad, I'm gay.
And what was his response?
He was like, what? He's like, that's how you're going to tell me? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm gay. And he's like, well, there's no build up. You're just going to shout it out. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm gay. That's all there is to it. And I didn't bother to tell him that it was because I was like counting exits. He said, I would have guessed this. I kind of knew, because you were always so popular with girls, but you never had a girlfriend. And he said, my two regrets are that you would be such a good father, and I feel like now you won't have kids. And I'm like, well, you never know, Dad. Things are changing. And then he's like, and my second regret is sex with women is so good, and I want you to get to experience that. I was like, well, you never know, Dad. And then we got to the hotel in Dollywood, this like campy hotel. And I wanted to go tell my boyfriend at the time. And so I'm leaving the room to go sit by the pool and have a conversation. And he said, Will, I want you to know I love you. And my dad, like, I can count how many times he said I love you on my hand, So it was good. Yeah.
Aww.
So yeah, cars is where I like to come out.
We should be in a car right now.
Yeah, I'd come out to you.
Yeah. So let's go one step back to when they floated the idea of going to this cafe. Did they tell you that it was a queer space, or were they just like, hey, do you want to hang out after rehearsal?
Yeah, good question. And, I was 16, I'm 45 now. I don't know. But I imagine that it was done in the most casual way possible so that it got a commitment out of me. So it wasn't like, oh, I don't know about that. I think that they really set it up as like, oh, no big deal. Let's go to this coffee shop. Aww. Just like when Rabba invited me for the sleepover, no big deal. Let's just crash up, at this cool house. And yeah, and it did make it feel more comfortable and more acceptable that I didn't have to come out before being in that safe space. I could just say like, oh, well, I trust these guys and it's a coffee shop. Like I like cappuccinos and coffee shops. So yeah.
Oh, like your fairy godmothers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for misgendering them.
No, I'm sure they would love that. But Rabba, he used to always wear this gold ring, and he said that it was his pride ring. Instead of like those rainbow pride rings, he had a gold ring. And he gifted it to me at the end of that show. Oh. So I wore this gold ring, all through high school and into college, and it was my pride ring.
But what happened to it?
I don't know. I
I
don't
hope
know.
Rob is not listening to this. Oh, poor Rob.
I know. Well, I'd like to find him. I don't know what's become of him or Derek. And I hope that ring is somewhere. I mean, it was real gold. It was like the nicest jewelry I ever owned. And I just, it was college. Like I was probably stoned and took it off and forgot it.
But, but so do you remember what the feeling was when you first stepped into that space?
Euphoria.
Oh, are you saying the name of the
No,
space
it's
or
that the.
what?
I guess both. I mean, it's in a way, it was euphoric. Which so it's funny to think about that name was so appropriate. It was scary too. It was scary, and I remember it was exposing, in a way. And I remember seeing my English teacher one day there. This was after I'd come out because so then after I came out, like this was my spot,
Yeah.
So I was going there all the time and hanging out and met a circle of queers and yeah, I remember seeing my 8th grade English teacher who always wore these fabulous brooches. He'd wear like these like crickets encrusted with gems and stuff, And but he was like I hadn't put it together that he might be gay, and I just remember seeing him and
What was that
having a
like?
conversation with him. It's very sweet, it's very comforting in a way to know that this person that I had learned from, who was in my world, at the school, right, where I had been bullied and ostracized, that I actually, had someone there who was like me. Yeah, it was very sweet. Yeah, and my time at Euphoria was very sweet. I have such fond memories of, and we just hang out there for hours, and we'd mostly be outside, at San Diego. So all year you can be outside, and that would give us the closest proximity to all the hot boys coming out of the club all sweaty.
So it was more of an evening space for you than a daytime space?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And the thing is, so I was living with my parents at the time, and so that was a good 30-minute drive from their place to the neighborhood, which was, near downtown. And so I would go in the evenings. And one of the things I remember about that time is when I would drive home, I remember many times on that drive thinking about, because it was becoming more and more clear that this is who I am and this is going to require that I come out of the closet, and then what does that mean? And so I would think about these things as I would drive this 30 minutes. And one of the things that I would think about was that this was during the height of the HIV AIDS, well, not the height, but one of the high points where you would turn on the TV and there'd be all these terrifying ads that were meant to, influence people to have safe sex, but they were terrifying. And so I would drive home and I would think, if I fully embrace this, I'm going to die of AIDS. And I would have that thought, and I can still remember, I can even place myself where in the freeway, and I can remember sweat just dripping down my armpits as I would sit with the fear of that death. And then to come to the conclusion that I was okay with that this truth that is inside of me is important enough to me to accept that fate.
That's a powerful thing to recognize. I'm changing the subject quickly, slightly.
Yeah.
I'm riffing on what you said. It wasn't until recently that I found out, because I grew up in the shadow of HIV and was privy to the propaganda and the people saying to me, "You're going to die of AIDS," whenever they wanted to insult me. I had thought that everyone experienced those ads and the targeted marketing in the same way. But recently I discovered that lots of heterosexual people that I knew just didn't even think about those ads. They were just like, this isn't anything to do with me. I'm not going to think about it. Even though none of the ads were like, by the way, this is for gay people. They were like, anyone, if you have unsafe sex, that's it. You're going to get HIV, you're going to die. And there's all of these people that watched those ads and were just like, oh yeah, nothing to do with me. And I was
Because it was a gay disease.
Yeah,
For them, it was a gay
so
disease.
fascinating to me that they just didn't resonate. They just closed off to those messages.
Meanwhile, it was occurring as terrifying to us
Yeah.
and fucking with our subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of something we could compare it to. You know, maybe it's like, I don't know, something that's impacting like people of a certain age or people in a certain area. I mean, maybe even like COVID, right? Like when COVID started, it was like, oh, well, I feel terrible for the people in China, but it's not happening to me. You know, or there's things I think that happen to us, and until we recognize that it's a threat for us, we tune them out. You know, and it's like privilege, really. It's like
Yeah, that's a good point.
tune out privilege.
Yeah. I guess it was just that the shocking thing for me was the recognition that I had thought that everyone was approaching something in the same way, and then to just be like, "Oh, this wasn't even on your radar. What?
They're like, what ads?
HI what now?" Yeah. Maybe let's not linger on this.
Yeah, sure.
So you were saying it was a place that you went to in the evening. So this was where all the people under 21 would go, maybe?
Yeah, there was no alternative. So yeah, it was the coffee shop and the bookstore. And so we'd kind of like, you know, hang out outside and gawk at the hot boys. And then we'd go to the bookshop and, you know, look at the newest. I wish I could think of some of the names of those magazines.
Oh.
I remember that there was a one called Freshmen, but that was like one of the X-rated ones, which I couldn't buy. But then there were like soft porn ones, you know. So then we'd go and we'd look at the books too, of course, and then we'd venture. Yeah, it was like a little circuit, you know. We'd walk, and then eventually the club would close, and so then all the hot guys would come out, and that was sort of our opportunity to maybe hook up with one of them, because now they weren't bopping back and forth in the club. Now they were outside where we were. I wasn't really doing that though.
Okay.
I was I was like, I don't know, I was 16, young, naive, innocent. Yeah.
I was going to say that's a strange dynamic.
I mean, now that I think about it, there was one or two times where I did, but yeah, it is a strange dynamic. This underage thing is like a complicated part of our history as gay, queer men.
Well, maybe not just ours. Maybe it's just everyone.
Sure. Yeah, but I do think that there's something, and maybe this is more from previous generations, but there's something more accepted. There was a different level of acceptance for a man of, you know, say in his 20s to be with a boy who's like 16 or 17. It was like, if you're old enough to know that you're gay and to say that you're gay, then you're old enough to be a consenting adult and have sex with someone who's over 18. That was the perspective that I was in when I was in my teens.
Okay.
That's how I understood it. I certainly don't subscribe to that now. But that's how it felt. And I feel like it was even more so in earlier generations, that there was, you know, people wouldn't bat an eye because they're like, well, he's old enough to come out, so then he's old enough to fuck, you know?
Yeah, and I do think that there is something interesting about older queers taking younger queers under their wing and guiding them.
Yeah.
But I think that there are lots and lots of cases of heterosexual dynamics where there's a 24-year-old with a 16 or a 15-year-old as well. So I think it's probably just something that was more socially acceptable.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, off on one again. Sorry, where are we going? Where are we? Euphoria. What do you think Euphoria taught you about yourself?
It taught me that it was okay to be myself. It taught me that I could be safe in this world, that there was a world for me. It's what it taught me. That, claiming my truth and coming out wasn't a sentence of being on the outside of the world, that I actually got to be invited in to a new world that was quite fabulous and fun.
So I normally end these conversations with a cheesy little, like, what would you say to that person if you got to go back in time and blah, blah, blah. But let's try something a little different today.
Mm-hmm.
If you got to have a conversation with Raba right now, so for those who are listening, Raba is the one who was under the covers sucking Wil off. What would you say to him?
I'd say, Raba, thank you for being a model for what being gay could be, and for helping me find the courage to be myself. And thank you for being a champion for my truth, and for showing me this path forward, and for allowing me to see that I can be fun and fabulous and loved, and that being gay was actually a really exciting and incredible opportunity. And I would say, don't gossip about me after you suck me off.
At least wait till I leave. Gosh.
Exactly.
Do you have any memories of Euphoria? Or maybe there was a queer coffee shop in your own scene that you want to tell me about? Well, if you do, then why not get in touch? I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories of clubbing and being queer in public, but I need your help. Go to lostspacespodcast.com, find the section Share a Lost Space, and then tell me all about what you got up to. There are always, of course, bonus points for embarrassing photos, so make sure you dig one or two out. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, where my handle is LostSpacesPod. Find out more about Wil whilst you're there by following him on Instagram at WilFish99, and that's WILFISH99. Or why not just give his podcast, Queerly Beloved, a little listen? If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you took the time to subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform, or just tell other people who you think might be interested in giving it a wee listen too. My name is Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces. Thank you.